So I probably shouldn't even be doing this right now because my head's in the middle of too many thoughts, and it has been for not long enough, but whatever. Um, so, how do I start this? So there's, in order to figure out a more, see, this is why I shouldn't be doing this right now. If you think of engineering problems, the one of the goals of engineering is to make the engineering more optimal, more efficient. So one of the prerequisites for being able to make something more efficient is you have to understand how part of it works in the first place. So this ties into the whole figuring out how to get people to live, and how much of the struggle to be alive is part of a person's meaning. So if someone is living with a universal basic income where they don't have to want for anything, how much does that potentially rob them of the meaning of what their life is? That's not even a good way to phrase it. Shit. You want to figure out a good way to have people find meaning, to find fulfillment. And in order to do that, you have to find a way that works at all in the first place. And it has to be something that's fairly transmissible to a broad swath of the population. But it has to be you have to sort of simplify it. It has to be sort of elegant in a way. So, like if you take, for example, the self-authoring program from Jordan Peterson, and I think even the people that know Jordan Peterson is brilliant don't really understand exactly how brilliant he is, because this is the kind of brilliance that you need for something like this. Like, so to understand what the self-authoring program is, like in the briefest possible way to understand it, is you determine what you want your life to look like in 5 years, what it would be like if you actually did what was necessary to make your life like that, and what would your life look like if you did not do what was necessary to make your life look like that. Basically, he's trying to get you to sort of view images of what you would view as heaven versus hell, right? What do I want to be in 5 years? What does my life look like if I do the things necessary to have that life? And what does my life look like if I don't do the things necessary to have that life? So what I mean by people don't actually genuinely understand how brilliant he is and why you need this sort of elegance is, if you ask somebody to conceptualize what's your life look like if you do all the things you need to do in 5 years, everybody knows the answer to this question, right? Really, without even thinking too hard. Like, most of them, if you ask them, they can immediately evoke the image in their head and they can see what it looks like. And the same with, what does your life look like if you don't do those things? Most people can immediately visualize what that looks like. So when he was first designing the self-authoring program, and he actually ran it on a test on the students in the university, I believe he saw a reduction in the dropout rate of the students that took the self-authoring program by something like 30%. So think about that for a minute. You ask somebody questions to which they already know the answer to without even really thinking. All you do is ask them questions. And just by the virtue of asking those questions, you drop the dropout rate by 30%. Holy shit. That is so brilliant that I almost can't even comprehend it. Like, could you think of a scenario where you could ask somebody a question that they already know the answer to, and just by the mere act of them answering it, they are more likely to succeed? Like, what the hell is that? That's nuts. But it's based on a really uncanny understanding of what humanity is to some extent. And I honestly don't think he expected or was ready for those results either. But Eddie Izzard had a great skit where he was talking about Pol Pot and how many people he killed, and he ended up on house arrest. And he was like, "Well done," because he was saying, once you kill a certain number of people, like, our brain just can't even handle it anymore. We just can't even tolerate it. We can't even process what that means. And I think part of what he discovered there is so bleeding edge brilliant that most people can't even comprehend how brilliant it is. You ask people 2 questions that they already know the answer to, and you drop their dropout rate by 30% in that demographic? Like, what the fuck is that? Like, that's crazy. So so I've been thinking about for one of the problems with coming up with an idea for how we're all going to live and exist in the society is everybody has sort of like their own idea of what it means to be good and what it means to be proper and what the right way is to do things. So how do you reconcile the difference between those two things? And it's part of the brilliant mechanism actually of Western democracy, and also part of it's failing, but I can't quite understand or verbalize how the failing is failing quite yet. I'm still working that out in my head. I can see the error before I can actually see it, if that makes sense. It doesn't really. What's a better way to explain it? It's like when you see something way off in the distance and you can't make out what it is, but you know something's there. I can see the problem with Western democracy like that. That's what it looks like. I know something's there, but I can't tell what it is yet. But part of the issue with part of what is good about the thing that I'm also simultaneously seeing the failure and that I can't understand, the good aspect of it is that it is so self-correcting. You have people that are constantly coming up with ideas and differences of opinion, and they're going back and forth about these different things. And when one goes too far, it makes enough of the people start to separate between their small groups. Because, typically you have people that are isolated in at least in our governmental system in America, you have people that usually identify with some subset of one of the two primary groups, being Republicans and Democrats. And whether or not they say they're a libertarian or a Green Party or whatever, they go along those two lines basically. And if one side starts to go too far out of whack, the other side starts to grow as a result until eventually the point that part takes over and they sort of bring it back to like a central more point of reason. But then invariably that part will then start to go a bit too far over the edge, and then the other part will grow back and forth. So it has sort of this ebb and flow like a tide between liberals and conservatives and who's in power and who's doing what. And when we see that they're trying to do one thing and it goes too far, it doesn't work, or it provides too much bad, and they go back and forth between who actually has the power. So that's actually one of the really powerful things about democracy, is that sort of thing, because people, even the dumbest among us are smart enough to see when something's like way, way wrong, right? If you have like, say, talking about World War II, you have internment camps where all the Japanese people are getting put behind chain link fences. Like, everybody can sort of look at that, or maybe not everybody, but enough people can look at it and be like, whoa, wait a minute, what are we doing? Wait, what's going on here, right? That's kind of what's happening with backlash of identity politics right now too. Enough people are saying, wait, if you just exist and you're white, you're racist? Whoa, wait a minute. That's what I mean. That's one of the really powerful things about the idea of Western democracy, is that it sort of enables that thing. And like I said, there's something wrong and lacking or insufficient with that method, but I can't quite make out what it is yet, really. But that gets the problem that, everybody thinks they know the way and their way is right. And, oh yeah? Go tell them. One of the things you can see when people, how do I go into how this is relevant? If you have a goal in mind, if you have something that's of importance to you, and it becomes a thing that's of primary importance, you have this goal or set of goals or this ideal that you want to achieve, this objective, right? You start doing a lot of things. If you're actually serious about pursuing that goal, there's a lot of things you start doing explicitly for the purpose of enabling that goal, and a lot of your life starts getting structured around the enablement or furthering of that goal. So, say for example, you want to be a really good martial artist, you start modifying your diet, you start actually running, you start meditating. There's all these various list of activities that you do that are all pursuant and trying to push toward the achievement of the singular goal. So, hey, Sunshine, come here. Pris, come here. Knock it off. So you start aligning more of your life around the attempt to achieve this goal, and more things that you do in your life start becoming more and more about how you centralize your effort towards the achievement of this goal through the various things that you do. So things that detract from the main goal may still exist, but by and large you start modifying a lot of your life in order for achieving this one particular end, right? And anybody that's had like one big goal that's been dominating above all other goals, is seeing this start to manifest in how it changes their behavior, how it modifies how they look at things. Like, if you have one single goal, then you start adjusting your life accordingly in order to support that goal. So why that's relevant? If you're in a political discussion, for example, a lot of times when people start political conversations, they start them from the presupposition of they are right and the other person is wrong for one reason or another, right? Knock it off. Here, come sit up here. Come sit up here. There you go. You know, they have this idea that what they're thinking is correct and what they're perceiving is the right way to do it because they feel they've already sort of identified and solved all these problems, which can lead to a problem when they start these conversations, because they start off as confrontational. You know, I've figured this out. Explain to me why you're not wrong, because I know I'm right. Because they have this whole set of goals that they're trying to achieve too as well, right? But the thing that's important, I think why a lot of those conversations fail, because I notice many of those conversations fail, and rarely do I see one of those conversations start that one person comes away more enlightened than they were before. Like, that, it's not very common that you see that happen. If, you know, a conversation starts of, well, explain to me why you do this. Well, explain to me why you do this. Like, that never gets anywhere, right? And I think part of that is because they're not doing the most important thing first. Like, if you go back to the example of being a martial artist, right? The reason you start restructuring the other aspects of your life is to coordinate with that singular goal, right? So let's say you're talking about modifying your diet and you're talking about modifying your exercise regimen, right? So when you're doing both of those things, you're talking about different areas of concern potentially, but the different areas of concern, the different areas of focus might intercede and overlap with one another. So for example, if you're saying you want to start jogging for your conditioning to be a martial artist, but you also want to modify your diet to help being a martial artist, those things may overlap, right? Because you may decide, I need to jog first thing in the morning when I wake up. Well, what if when you wake up you don't have enough energy because you haven't eaten properly enough, or you haven't eaten enough food? What if you need to actually eat first and relax for 10 minutes and then jog? Or should you wake up immediately and then do your exercise and then eat? But what I mean is they have areas of overlap and concern, but the thing that always helps them function and work together in the final analysis of it all is whether or not they are actually meeting together in order to achieve the singular goal, which is becoming a better martial artist. So when you're actually having a conversation about, you know, how life should be structured, what we should do in terms of our actions, we need to start those conversations from the point of commonality. You know, a lot of people talk about this as the concept of, you know, starting with common ground. You need to find common ground with who it is you're talking about. And it's like, I think a lot of people misunderstand what that means, even the people that are trying to utilize it for a positive end. I don't think the point is to find a central thing that, you know, the point isn't to find, what's the word? Compromise. It's not to find compromise. It's to make sure that you guys are along the same goal, right? What is it we're having this conversation about? Why are we having it? What is it we're trying to achieve? You know, if you have a liberal who's having a conversation with a conservative, the first thing they need to do, I think, is in this conversation, they need to actually determine what it is they're talking about and what their goal is and what they feel is appropriate first. And I think that's really important, that they actually come to the commonality of what it is they're aiming at. You know, if you have a conversation about immigration, for example, because, you know, you have your caravan that's coming up to the south border, when people are saying, oh, we need to keep them out, versus, oh no, we need to let them all in, it's like, okay, but what are we actually talking about? What is it we're actually trying to achieve here in regard to, you know, how America functions? What is it we think? Are we trying to say that, you know, immigrants are the strength of America? Because I don't think either side disagrees with that, right? I don't think either side thinks that immigrants are an issue for America. Are we trying to say we want our country to be safe? Because I don't think either side is saying they don't want the country to be safe, right? You know, you need to start with the commonalities first. You need to be sure that you're aligned with the goal, because if you're not both aligned with the same goal, if you don't understand what your point of commonality is first, when you go to what your differing ground is, if you don't have common ground in the first place, there is no there is no path to a point of resolution. There isn't the possibility of coming to an equitable answer. There is no way that you can actually get to whatever the proposed solution is to the problem, because you're already starting off with believing that you're on different courses. If you're not trying to achieve the same end to start off with, and you think this is the end I'm trying to achieve and you're not trying to achieve this end, you start off from confrontation without a point of commonality. And if you're going to be in a civil society and you want the society to remain civil, you cannot do that. You can't, because if you're not ultimately trying to achieve the same lofty goal, you're ultimately trying to achieve different lofty goals. And at that point, you're in direct conflict and you're in direct opposition with the other person. And the only way out of direct conflict and opposition of that nature is through conflict, right? There isn't I'm going to win you over to my side because you don't agree what the actual goal is in the first place. So I think if you're going to have a conversation of that sort, you have to start with understanding what it is you're trying to achieve, and that somehow you both are on the same team. You just think there's different ways to get there. Because I think it's too often that people assume that's like, oh, okay, well, of course we're on the same side because we're all Americans and we want America great. It's like, yeah, but what the fuck do you even mean by that? Like, you have to be sure you understand that between the two of you and that you agree on what that means. And if you can't agree on what that means, you have to go a layer back and a layer back and a layer back until you get to the most fundamental definition of what it is you guys are talking about and find the point you agree on. Because if you don't do that, you're not trying to achieve the same end, you're trying to achieve different ends. And if you're trying to achieve different ends, all you can do is have conflict. There isn't a way for peaceful resolution through that method. So why this even matters, besides obvious reasons for political discourse. If we want people to be better, if we want people to be happy, if we want people to be fulfilled, if we want them to be content, if we want them to be satisfied, we have to agree on what that is first. That's the thing we need to agree on first. What does that look like? Because, I hear some people talking about this topic and they feel what that looks like, that people have actually achieved or whatnot, is that they're not subject to catastrophic failure. That they think, I want people to be able to achieve and somehow be simultaneously immune from abject destruction, from trying to achieve whatever this thing is and failing at it. And the thing is I don't think you can do that. I don't know necessarily you can insulate people to that level and still have them have the capacity for greatness. And I'm not saying I know that for sure. I don't know that for sure, but I don't think you can. Maybe. But see, that's what I mean. That's the level that we need to be talking about this on first before we're talking about even the methodology of things, right? There's definitive scientific literature where we've studied stuff like this at length, and we need to make sure that we understand exactly what the hell we're talking about and we know what the goal is before we even try to get there. So if we start trying to institute all these different policies and regiments before we even can understand what has even been proven to work and not to work, just in like basic human interaction, it's like, what the hell are we even talking about? Like, we're just making shit up when we've already done a lot of the legwork to understand all this stuff in the first place. So, it matters because if we want to, going back and cycling through sort of all the stuff I've been talking about so far, I think the thing that we should be aiming at is how to, as much as possible, maximize the capability for people to become whatever the greatest heroic aspect of themselves is. That's what our structure should be built for, to enabling that in individuals. That should be the goal of the structure. The structure enables people to find and manifest themselves in their most heroic aspect possible. That should be what our structure is built to do. So you have to have some idea on what that means, what that looks like. How do you even define what that is? Like, what are the actual mechanisms that allow you to do something like that? And, there's a, for things that we've learned that people teach one another, that parents teach their children, what things have we seen to be the most effective in that regard? Like I'll give you an example. I think an important thing to understand about life in general is not that necessarily life is suffering. It's that stillness is death. The default state of life is to die. That's the default. And if you want to know why that's the default, sit there and do nothing. And if you do nothing for 2-3 days, you'll die. Right? So in order to live, you have to act. You have to pursue inaction. That means there is no such thing as a life that is living that does not include acting in the pursuit of something. There is no point that you achieve in life where you don't have to do anything anymore. You get to just lay back, do nothing, and be content. I don't think that exists. I don't think that's a thing you can do. Much to my chagrin, because I would love it if that were the case. If you could just sit around, do nothing, and be content, but it's just not so. If you sit around and do nothing, you die. If you move, you live. So if you want to live and you want to feel life and you want to feel alive, you must move. That means you must be doing something. You can't be doing nothing. Doing nothing leads to death. That's an important thing to understand about being alive, because there's a lot of concept of living on easy street and I don't have to lift a finger and that's how I know everything's great. But I don't think that is how you know everything's great. I think that's how you feel like worthless, and I think that's how you feel dead inside. And I think for the people that say are rich, that have everything, the ones that aren't happy, is because they don't have to do anything. I think that's part of why they feel so terrible. But that's a fundamental thing to understand if you're trying to talk about what sort of things you have to teach and educate people on to understand. If you have a perception that success and meaning in life is achieved from reaching a status where you no longer have to do anything, your idea is totally wrong. And it's really important to know that. It's really, really important to know that, because that's the most fundamental, basic of questions, right? So if you're going to optimize people's capacity to manifest their own heroic, their most heroic selves, you have to understand what it means to be alive, what it means to be heroic, what it means to be fulfilled. And I think no matter what that is, it involves action in some capacity, right? Like, take the example of, fear. Everybody knows what it is to be afraid. Everybody knows what that feels like. They don't necessarily know what it feels like to the greatest extent that they could possibly be afraid, but everybody has some sort of concept of what fear is. And what the antithesis of fear is. If I just say the words to you, fear and courage, they make you think two completely different things, and two things that are the opposite. And fear, when you think about it, you can almost see your head going down. And courage, when you think of it, you can almost see your head going up. So to be afraid of something is to do nothing in the face of something. And to be courageous is to be afraid and stand up and do something. And there's an important aspect to understanding that, because it means that if you're going to do something that's great, you have to be afraid and you have to move anyway. You're a good boy, kid. Put up with your sister like that. You're a good girl, sunshine. Hey, kid, come here. What do you got in your tongue? Come here. Kid, come here. Kid, come here. Make me use the dad voice. What do you got in your mouth? Nothing? You already got it? Okay. Yeah, that's good puppies. I mean, think about the kind of person. If you're inclined to follow a person, what kind of person are you inclined to follow? Are you inclined to follow the person that's afraid and has their head down, or are you inclined to follow the person that's courageous and has their head up and is looking forward? Do you look up to the person that's afraid and is terrified and frozen into inaction, or do you look up to the person that's courageous and scared but moves forward no matter what? Like, it's a very simple thing to understand. If you just think about the difference between fear and courage, you know which one you look up to. You know which one you aspire to be. So having beliefs or thoughts that lead from a point of here's what you should be afraid of is the coward way to do things. It's the easy way to do things, because all it requires you to do to be afraid ultimately is to do nothing. To find the way to be courageous in the face of fear, that's the way to do something. But if I say to you, be afraid or be courageous, which one do you want to do? Even the people that are terrified, none of them think, I want to be afraid and I want to sit here and do nothing. They all think, I want to be brave and I want to do something. So it's very important to understand something like that, because it's a fundamental building block of the meaning of what it means to be alive and what you should be doing at all. What you should be doing at all is being courageous. What you should be doing at all is finding the thing that you look up to, because that's the thing that actually leads you toward being alive. So, I mean, this matters because if we're going to find, there is a more optimal way to educate people on how to exist than what we currently have. There is a better way to do it than we are doing it now. Because right now we sort of have like the equivalent of a state level experiment. And what I mean by that is, every parent raises their child their own way in the way that they see fit. But it's like, yeah, but there is a better way that they could all implement into their toolkits and then start to experiment on top of that next method. There was, in the same way that there was like, theocracies to monarchies to democracies. I think we're to the point that we understand enough of what it means to be a human being that we can start actually structuring things that every parent should learn, that give them, one, a base level of starting with, that we know these are the things that you should teach your children, no matter what. These are the things you should teach. And the second is, and you experiment and figure out what makes sense in addition to that, right? You tweak around with that. You mess with it. You see what you can figure out that's maybe better, maybe worse. Feel free to experiment. Feel free to, teach your child to be a Christian or a Jew or an atheist or whatever. That doesn't matter. But these are things that they need to understand intrinsically. And they need to be to the level of understanding, like, do you want to be afraid or do you want to be brave? They need to be to the level of understanding of, think about what you have to do to make your life look like you want it to look like in 5 years, and what does that look like? And think about what your life would look like in 5 years if you do nothing, and then reduce the dropout rate by 30%, right? Like, it needs to be that kind of answer. It needs to be that level of core fundamental realization. It needs to be something that's a series of questions or a series of things that you can proposition to people that they already know the answer to somewhere there inside of their head, but the mere act of getting them to look at it and ask the questions in the first place improves their chance of success in what it is they're trying to do. Just like, how many decisions do you make because you're afraid? Without even thinking about it. And you're afraid. You are, but you don't sit there and think, I'm afraid, I'm brave. You don't go through that level of analysis with it. You just think, I'm afraid of this happening, so I'm going to do this because I'm afraid, right? But if I sit there and ask you, fear or courage, which do you want? You know the answer. You immediately know the answer. So it has to be some level of analysis like that. The method to getting people to this realization of manifesting their own true, heroic, idealized version of themselves needs to function like that. It's a set of questions that you're asking them that somewhere inside them they already know the answer to. They just haven't actually bothered to straightforward, strictly ask that question specifically. And when they do, it will modify and change their actions because they've started to act on something that they already intrinsically knew somewhere in their head. So that's the things we have to start figuring out. It's that level of analysis that we need to be building this, set of commandments, if you will. And I mean, it has to be that obvious. It has to be that integrated into what's already default human understanding. It has to be the level of, do you want to be afraid or do you want to be courageous? Which one do you want? And if you look at this thing and you're afraid, what are you going to do if you're afraid? And if you look at that same thing and you're courageous, what are you going to do? And how's that going to change what your life looks like? And if you respond to this thing like you're afraid of it, what are you going to look like in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years? And if that's how you live your life, through the actions of your fear, how is your life going to look? And if you look at the act as though you're courageous, and this is how you act, and this is how you function, what's your life going to look like in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? Because it's the same thing. You ask people that question, they already know the answer. Right? And that's sort of like the simplistic, elegant brilliance of it, is they already know. We already know the answer to this. We just haven't actually straight up, no bullshit, asked the question. Because we haven't figured out what the actual question is. We haven't figured out how to formulate it in such a way that it breaks on the things that we already know and we already understand. I mean, think about the question for the self-authoring program. That's not some highfalutin, erudite question. That's like, what will your life look like in 5 years if you pursue your goals and do what's necessary to achieve them? That's something a 12-year-old can understand. That's a very simple, straightforward question. It's not something you have to have like a quantum physics degree to understand, right? That's the level of question we need for this type of analysis. The analysis that we go through has to provide us questions that are like that ring so true that it drops our dropout rate by 30%. That's the method to do this. And the first thing we have to do in order to get to that level of analysis is we have to agree what the goal is. We have to be on the same fucking team. Because if we aren't on the same team, the only thing that's left to do is to fight. If you don't have the same ultimate goal as somebody else, you should fight them. That's how that works. People often mistake their current understanding of how to achieve that goal as the goal, and think anybody that disagrees with their current understanding disagrees with the goal. But it's because they're not bothering to actually ask and form out what the goal is every single time they talk about this stuff. They just assume it's a known goal. They assume what they think is the way to get there. So they assume their method is synonymous with the goal, and it's not. It's not at all. So, whatever this set of what am I trying to say? Whatever this methodology is that allows people to unlock the heroic aspect, I'm fairly certain what it's going to look like is going to be in some form asking them to answer questions to which they already know the answer, and probably specifically to which they know the answer, but to which they know the good answer and the bad answer. They know them both. What does your life look like if you act because you're afraid? What does your life look like if you act because you're courageous? It has to, whatever this method is going to look like that. It's going to be questions like that. and there's going to need to be more than that. There needs to be an understanding of, how the what's even the words I'm looking for? How our meaning, how our existence is meant to function as a collective. In the same way that if you're talking about modifying your diet and your exercise regimen in pursuit of being a martial artist, because being the martial artist is the high ideal goal. That's the thing you're holding up on, not necessarily the pedestal, but it's the thing that you're saying, that's the thing I want to follow. When you have interpersonal relationships with other people, the person you want to follow is the person that is what you visualize as a best case version representation of that collective ideal that you're working toward. Nobody wants to follow the fearful coward. Everybody wants to follow the courageous hero, which again, why so many people love Elon Musk. He doesn't give a damn about winning or losing the money. Ultimately, he gives a damn about all of us winning. That's what he cares about, and you can see that in him. That's the person we want to follow. So our goal needs to be a thing like that. That's the thing we want to follow. And I think that goal is some iteration of we want to maximize the capability and potential of all people to unlock their most heroic aspect. That's our goal, collectively. That doesn't mean you have to be at the very tip top of whatever it is you're doing. I think that's something that people often get wrong about the understanding of this. It doesn't mean you have to be the top. It means you have to be following someone that you feel like you should be following. You have to have found someone that you can identify with, that you can follow and feel like they should be the one leading. Being someone that's following them doesn't mean you aren't your most heroic aspect. Maybe your most heroic aspect is being someone that works at SpaceX because you believe in what Elon Musk is doing. I don't think it's you have to be at the top. I think it's you have to be following someone who's at the top of the particular hierarchy, and we all agree that person should be at the top. So there's a few things we need. One, we need a more concise goal that sort of everybody can sign up and agree with. That something akin to our goal is to architect a system that enables people to manifest their most heroic aspect. That's the thing that we need to build. Some phrase or concept like that. And the ways in which we get people to go about pursuing that is through a series of questions to which the answers to them are already obvious. They just haven't actually bothered asking that exact question yet. Because there's so much of this stuff we already know, we just don't know how to ask. And if we don't know how to ask, in a lot of cases that's as good as not knowing. I don't know, I'm still working through a lot of this stuff in my head, but I think that's pretty accurate. I think that's what it's going to look like. Maybe.